Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Truthcast Show, the first episode. A little technical difficulty there, to say the least. The beginning, that's why I have such a late start. I was trying to figure out how to operate the screen again. Split screen was giving me a little bit of trouble, but thankfully I've figured it out, sort of, for the most part. So hope everyone's doing well out there. Happy Sunday. So today we're going to delve into the topic of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the fall, looking at various pieces of evidence that point towards that. But not only that, we're going to go down the line into that of the flood story, the evidence surrounding that, down into the Tower of Babel. We're going to look at all that evidence and see how all correlates, and also help shed light on an earlier dating period compared to traditional dating systems of only 4,000 BC, extending it back approximately 8 or more thousand years earlier. So should be pretty good. I have quite a few photos to go through on the show. That was my main concern. I was trying to get these double screens to work, and I was struggling out there at first. That way I can have the photos working into the show here. And I saw that someone said, good evening. It only shows Facebook user. I'm assuming that's coming from the group page. So if you could just identify yourself, that would be rather helpful. But good evening to you as well, and thank you for tuning in. Before we begin, I'd like to do a word of prayer. Dear Lord God, Jesus Christ, please bless this study this evening. Be with us, Lord. Fill us with Holy Spirit. Cleanse us from our sins. Help us to understand your word better. Help these pieces of evidence that we'll present to help shed light and enlighten us to understand your word better, and to strengthen our faith in your word and the reliability of your word, and to know that your word's true, and to put it deep within our hearts and minds, and to live it out. Thank you for all things, Lord. Continue to bless us, be with us, and strengthen us. In great name, pray, Lord Jesus Christ, Father in heaven. Amen. Okay, so let me see if I can do this correctly now. You would think, as young as I am, to a certain extent, that I'd be a little bit more tech savvy, but that seems not to be the case. Of course, I don't really use this stuff very often. Okay, let me see where we can start here. We'll start with the river systems, as I spoke about on the show the other day. Oh, it looks like, hang on right quick. Go down the line. Oh no, I have, for whatever reason, I do not have that photo in my list here. I don't know why that would be. Let me scroll over here right quick and check the emails. I know I put it in here somewhere. I just have to download it once again. I literally have about 40 or so pictures, various things. There we go. Oh, let me re-download that right quick. Okay. One little gnat flying around here. Okay, yeah, it always pops up on the other screen. So still haven't figured that out. All right, here we go. So, well, I want to make that a little bigger than that. Not sure how to do that. I'll just do it like this. So, traditional location of the Garden of Eden is set down by the Persian Gulf, where the river Euphrates and Tigris meet. But according to Genesis chapter 2, okay, now I got one face. Hey, Alan, thank you for tuning in. And then I have someone on the Facebook group page. It just says Facebook user. I'll try to look on here and see who it is. Oh, Don and Kim. Thank you guys for joining in. But in Genesis chapter 2, in verse, let me get over here right quick. Verse 10, it says, "Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became 4 riverheads." So this is actually where the river Euphrates and Tigris originate, up in Turkey rather than the Persian Gulf. They flow into the Persian Gulf. They don't issue forth from there. So before I show that again, I'll go ahead and put up the actual word, Hebrew word that, I don't know why it keeps popping up like that. There we go. So this is the actual Hebrew word, yatzah, which means to go out, to come out, exit, go forth. It's proceeding forth from. So that would mean that it's where the river begins and and it actually flows out of the Garden of Eden rather than into the Garden of Eden. And as I said, according to traditional locations of the Garden of Eden, being in the Persian Gulf, the rivers actually flow, the Euphrates and Tigris actually flow into the Persian Gulf rather than initiating from that particular point. And so what this says is in chapter 2, verse 10, it says the river went out, or Yatzah, proceeding forth from the Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became 4 riverheads. So this is issuing out and then, emerging, proceeding into 4 different riverheads. And that the original map that I've shown before shows exactly that. This is where those rivers, there's actually a river called the Munzor River that comes out of the Munzor Valley National Park. Beautiful landscape through there. I'll show you in a second. Actually resembles much of that of a depiction, or at least, modern day depiction of the Garden of Eden that flows, trying to do it over here. See, that's the area that's flows into Lake Kaban, and then also flows through the river Euphrates. You see the Tigris down here. It seems as though it used to connect up into this region and flow down. The Maratz is also there, and Perez. So there's 4 different riverheads. This river right here is actually part of the river Euphrates. So there's 4 riverheads that all flow from this area. Except Marat. Marat actually flows into here. So there's a Perez, but as you can tell, flowing into there and becoming 4 different rivers fits the depiction, especially as it proceeds forth from that area. Let me go ahead and get this back over here. So it presents a completely different location, and the location fits perfectly with much of archaeological evidence that surrounds that, that's around that region, rather than the Persian Gulf. So let me go ahead and pop up a picture of what this land actually looks like. Sure. Oh no, it's finally popping up over there. Great. All right. So this is what the land actually looks like in the Munzor Valley, where the Munzor River flows through. So you can see how it's a great depiction of like a Garden of Eden style dwelling. Beautiful waterfalls, trees, various different fruit and nut trees throughout that particular area. Thousands of various different plant life, floral life, and of course, someone would be texting me right now. They done distracted me. And so, and this is the actual location, right? And it has various different animal life, wildlife, all over the place. I had it written down. I can't remember exactly where I thought I'd written it down in here, but they have different cattle, birds. It's a very beautiful, fertile region still to this day. And then here is the actual location. I zoomed in on Google Earth, where the Moonsar River initiates and then flows down. And so it's going down. You can see the tree lines, and of course, with deforestation of modern day humans, I'm sure that region had much more plant life and tree life around it compared to today. We have another Facebook user chiming in over here on the Facebook. Kelly Erickson, thank you for joining. I really appreciate you tuning in. So a completely different location for the Garden of Eden compared to contemporary thought. And there's a reason this is important to identify this, because well, one thing, it makes it much more real rather than just some fictional mythological story that were conjured up by ancient people. But at the same time, the connection with that of agriculture and domestication found not too far from this region that helps correlate with the biblical narrative of the Garden of Eden, that of the first two humans of Adam and Eve, as well as their descendants. Because in chapter 2 of Genesis, verse 5 says, before any planted the field, said God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. So it's the absence of agriculture. But a mist came up and they formed Adam. And then also that of domestication, because it also says that out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. Whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name. So Adam gave names to all the cattle, to the birds of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not found a helper comparable to him. So what's interesting about that is that it implies that of domestication. It only mentions the birds of the air and the cattle and beasts of the field. So it's implying that of agriculture, the absence of agriculture, as well as that of domestications of animal life. And we see that following in chapter 4, whenever the birth of Cain and Abel come into play. These characters, one is a shepherd and the other is a farmer. And it's very fascinating because both agriculture and farming seem to emerge out of the same place and around the same time. And that is the Zagros mountain range over in Iran. So let me get a picture up here. It's right here. It's kind of small, unfortunately, but trying to figure out how to get it to be bigger over time. But Zagros mountain range, it kind of runs, the Taurus mountain range is up here, and then you have the Zagros, which kind of flows up into Turkey on the eastern side. Now, up in here, I'm not sure if you can actually see the mouse or not, but up here is where the Garden of Eden would have been placed. So this is eastward, southeast, eastward of the Garden of Eden. And it's very important because, let me get another image up here. Well, man, they are really small. So yeah, it flows up into Turkey, but it's the eastward of the Garden of Eden. Now, one of these is here. So, let's see what. Let's see. Let's try to look for the Hebrew word. Sorry, give me a moment here. Field. So, let me go ahead and zoom this over to the. This is the Hebrew word kadim, which. Oh yeah, that's true. Thank you, Alan. Of course, this one's rather big. I'll do that definitely on some of the smaller ones. And I'm pretty sure I'll have plenty of other small ones to go into the deal. So what's fascinating about okay, my Bible's torn out there. This word is found in chapter 3 of Genesis, going down to well, we can start verse 22, where it says, "And the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put out his hand and take also the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to till the ground." So that introduction again of tilling the ground, of agriculture, from which he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way of the tree of life. So the east of the Garden of Eden is this word kadim, which means east, antiquity, front, but it's it's eastward is what the Strong's definition actually states on there. And so they were driven, that would imply that they were driven eastward. Well, that region, the Zagros Mountains, is eastward of that particular region. And it houses the very first evidence for both agriculture and domestication of animals, both of which date back to around 12,000 years or more back into the past. And what's fascinating is that the first animals that were domesticated in that particular region were actually goats, followed by sheep. And it says that Abel was tended to the sheep, but that actual word that is used, now I'm going to find which one it was again. There, I think it's this one. There we go. Actually, the word sown, which means small cattle or sheep and goats. So it can mean goats, and goats are actually the very first domesticated animal, followed by sheep, of which Abel took care of. And we see Cain being a farmer; he's a tiller of the ground, and all that emerged from the Zagros Mountains 12,000 years ago, over 12,000 years ago. When you get that far back into dating, it becomes an approximate dating system rather than something that's precise. So it could be 12,000 years or well before that, anywhere up to 15 or more thousand years ago, which we'll get into even. I believe that Adam and them were sometime prior to even 15,000 years, probably somewhere around 18,000 years, because there's even evidence for wild domestication, or not wild domestication, but wild agriculture, dating all the way back to 23,000 years ago. I found in various places where they didn't really till the ground, but they took from wild plants and began to cultivate crops, gather crops in various different places. And so look at the Zagros mountain range here. This picture, beautiful picture to see kind of how fertile this region is, how beautiful it really is. And then this is where they're digging at an archaeological site, finding, of course, the ground didn't look quite like that 12,000 or more years ago, of course, but they found all sorts of farming equipment. And this is an old seed, I believe from granule from a wheat plant, if I'm not mistaken. And so dating very far back into the past. And so the traditional dating just doesn't add up with the archaeological evidence. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here, that I believe it's much older than what we actually derive from. We believe that the genealogical record throughout Genesis is completely accurate, but I believe just like our notion of the past, as humans looking back, even archaeologically speaking, it becomes scattered the further back you go. It becomes less precise. It's the same thing with the genealogical record. It gets more precise as you go forward. Like you get into the time of Abraham and it goes down the line, it becomes more and more precise because the people who wrote the book of Genesis were closer to that time, so they had more adequate information to put into the text. But as you get further and further back, it becomes less and less, or more and more scarce along the way, because it extends so far back. And so they did their best to put all that information together. And that's a very difficult task to do. So looking at the agriculture, and let me see. Okay, so another interesting little side note is the fact that the very first, the earliest record of a string instrument dates back to 15,000 years ago. And the importance of this is actually found in Genesis chapter 4, after Cain kills Abel, and the genealogical record of Cain goes down to Jabal, who is the father of those that play the harp and the flute, string instrument being the harp. And I find that very fascinating that he's supposed to be the one that created that instrument. And the earliest evidence we find is stemmed all the way back to 15,000 years ago. So that would put Adam and Eve anywhere from 20,000 years ago up into the Zagros Mountain region, eastward of the Garden of Eden. And of course, these are just evidence I'm presenting, and I'm still trying to put it all together. It's not quite that easy to put everything together. People spend years and years trying to analyze data, and still at the end of the day, it's not completely certain, but it should at the very least help strengthen our faith in knowing that these stories are actually true. They're based off true events. It's not some fictional made up. And I've heard several different Christians say that over the years, that Adam and Eve really are just archetypes. It's an archetypal story, mythological story. Same thing with Noah and the flood. But I mean, those are very central themes to the overall Christian narrative, especially when in regards to the fall. That's a very, very important part in the story. And so it needs to be true, to say the least. And I'll do my best to try to kind of explain that a little bit more as we go through the possibilities, if they're not necessarily the very first Homo sapiens, modern humans, and how does that fall into play of entering into a fallen state of being. But that I'll do my best, if I can get enough time. We're already at 23 minutes. Try to do my best to expound on that a little bit before. And I have on I believe the thought-provoking hours. I've done that before. So now what I really want to focus on is we see that pieces of early evidence for the Garden of Eden, even Cain and Abel, the first bits of agriculture and domestication, the earliest record of string instruments. And so where does that all fit in, especially in regards to, as you get down the line, to the story of Noah and the flood? And as I said before, I believe there to be gaps. So we're not sure exactly the actual accurate distance, genealogically speaking, of that of Adam and Noah. So it's not sure how many thousands of years may have passed through the line before you get to him. But there is evidence for mass flooding, not quite to the biblical proportion, but a fair amount, around 11,700 years ago or so, right around in that approximated time frame. So that puts us somewhere around 10,000 BC, approximately. And what's important about that date is one thing is various structures throughout the world that I'm about to show. Almost like an ancient lost civilization. And that correlates right with the story of Atlantis, told by Plato. And actually, I think it was Homer was the very first one that investigated that and said that the people had told him that it was 9,000 years ago that Atlantis sunk, and it was, magnificent civilization and stuff most people disregard as mythology, and it may very well be. But along with some of these other pieces of evidence I'm going to show, it seems as though that may actually be a real place, and that would actually put the dating back to 9600 BC, whenever Atlantis existed. And the Bible tells us the same thing when the sons of God came and mated with the women of the earth, bearing Nephilim, and they were men of renown, which is that of fame. And so they were highly intelligent, extraordinarily strong. Most believe that they were giants. And so, and yeah, I know, Alan, they do. It shows, life lengths at hundreds of years. But I did look at the genealogical record difference between Adam and Noah, and it puts it about 1600 years. But that's still, that's an approximate dating. If it's true that Adam was sometime around 18,000 years ago, Noah would be sometime around 10,000 BC. So that's about 8,000 year difference in there. But like I said, I think it's just scattered through. These are just ideas I'm presenting and trying to piece things together. It's by no means certain. So there was mass flooding, and even according to the story of Atlantis, that was one of the markers that took the place down, the continent or city that was there. And so I'm going to look at some other real pieces of evidence from that time frame. This is one of them, and everyone's quite familiar with this, the Sphinx from Egypt. So if you look, the forearms here, the front legs, as well as the head, are actually much newer than the body itself. Most people contribute it to Khufu, which is about 2500 BC. And there's actually a statue right over here that states that. But a geologist named Robert Schoch, he's the one that come up with the idea that this is much older than 2500 BC. And in fact, he dates it to approximately 10,000 BC or earlier because of the erosion of the body. The body is much older than the actual head and arms. Those are newer bricks compared to the body. And he was saying that there's massive water erosion that has occurred throughout the body, dating it much older. As I said, he dates it to about 10,000 BC or earlier. So the same time around, right around Atlantis would have existed, according to tradition. This is another monument. Some believe that it's not really anything but a geological formation, natural geological formation. And actually, ironically enough, Robert Schoch is one of those people. He believes it's just a natural formation. But if you look at how this is laid out and how it's almost, cut out perfectly, it definitely makes a strong case for it to be artificial. And the last time this was actually above water, this is in Japan. If I'm not mistaken, it was 80 feet, I believe, underwater. 80 feet or 80 meters. I can't remember exactly which one, under the water. And you can swim down there and look at this magnificent structure. I mean, it's huge. And they said the last time that would have been, if it is in fact a structure, this is actual artistic design of what they mapped out of this structure. And you can see various stairways. If this is in fact of artificial origin, they believe maybe it's a temple. You see an entrance right here down at the bottom. They said the last time it was actually above water, it was prior to 10,000 BC. So again, putting it right around the time of Atlantis, as well as the proposed date of the Great Sphinx being built. And some even believe that the Great Pyramids were built around that same time, around 10,000 BC. And so there's a lot of stories and some evidence to suggest that as well. Massive, complex structures being built that far back in time. And let's see, here's another structure that's underwater. This is located, I'm trying to remember the exact name of what it's actually called. Um, it was a city over in India. If I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember exactly what that city was called again. Let me see if I can find it. If I can find it on here. No, it's not really helping me out very much. Anyways, I can't remember exactly what the city name is, but it is submerged in water. And the last time that it was actually um, above the water was approximately 10,000 BC, 9,600 BC, somewhere around that same time as Atlantis again. And this is what the actual History Channel, what they depicted the city would have looked like at that time. Very complex structure for dating that far back in time. Um, so there was some type of intelligence going on, and it correlates with the stories found in Genesis of the sons of God mating and boring the Nephilims. And what's ironic is that the ancient Sumerian stories speak of similar depictions of the Anunnaki and helping humanity build, which are angelic type beings that helped build some of the civilization. And they dated to way back as well. And so it's very, very interesting that large wooden compartments found at 13,000 feet. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm glad you mentioned that, Alan. I'm actually going to show one picture of the Ark. Um, plot the possible remnants of the Ark embedded within mountains of Ararat, which you may have seen as well. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I can't remember as far as large wooden compartments found. I remember back, I think it was like 2010, some Asian scientists claimed that they have found like wooden deal, and they went in and with the wooden ship on the mountain, and come to find out it was a hoax, and they really made it up and made a lot of people mad, including myself. But I do know they have like what's an impression in the mountainside, which I'll show here shortly, of the possible ark, which actually has the same measurements as depicted in the Bible. So it's very fascinating on that end. And I mean, and I'm still going through the list of how many things actually pop up from prior to 10,000 or 10,000 BC or so. Oh, this is here in America, over in Nevada, called by Pyramid Lake. I'll try to zoom in just a little bit so you can see some of the designs on here. Complex, abstract etchings into hard rock. And what's so crazy is this was an astonishing discovery, and it dates back to 10,000 BC because prior to that, there was nothing like this in America, even in South America, let alone all the way through the Americas. This is very complex, abstract art, which shouldn't be present during this time. They believed that most of the dwellers at that time, most of the inhabitants in America, were primitive, and they wouldn't be able to, create something of complexity like that. And this is another art. You see all the different etchings and what art it may be depicting, or what stories it's telling. And you could tell some of it's actually kind of torn apart and abandoned. It was not much is known. Of course, this is if I'm saying it correct, Manchu Picchu, or however you say it, I can't even recall. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is a part of the Incan Empire, which exists around 1500 AD, which is about 500 years ago. But what makes it relevant is these large stones found underneath the smaller stones that actually make up that complex, that are so finely cut along these edges you can't even fit a sheet of paper in between. And what's interesting is the Incan story actually says that giants built these thousands of years before they came to dwell there, and they built on top of these deals. But a lot of mainstream archaeologists are like, no, they put them in place. But these are huge stones. I mean, most of them cut out and placed so well, weighing several tons. Um, and they, like I said, they say, and you can see right here where it has more of the smaller stones. Those are the ones that Incan actually put, and look at the comparable size difference. And they said that these stones are much older. And some archaeologists have actually determined they might be dated back to about 10,000 BC. And again, here's the uh, the later stones built on top of the more intricate stones. Here you can see all along there, and then you have the smaller stones actually put in place by the Incans. So a drastic difference between the two. And they propose that it dates back to about 10,000 BC. Some of them do now. And then you have, let's see here, and we have, this is an interesting thing. Most people, it's kind of been forgotten, but back in early 2000, this was a structure under the water. I forgot exactly how many meters, 600 meters under the water, I believe is what it was. So pretty far down there. And it was dated back to about 50,000 years ago. That was the last time this would have been dry. Of course, they stated that it may have, a lot of people are saying it's natural formations, and they kind of shrugged it off, but there's some that still believe that this is an actual complex structure, artificial in nature, not natural, and it was built, and it could have been part of some type of city or civilization that collapsed into the ocean. Maybe 50,000 years ago, but if it collapsed, they said it may have been sometime in the same range as the Sphinx and Atlantis, all these structures dating back to about 10,000 BC. And what's so important, let me get back over here. What's so important about this is that would revise the date of Noah and the Ark, going back several thousand more years than what actually, Oh, wow, that's interesting, Alan. Oh, hey, Jack, thank you for tuning in. Incan symbols found in North. And that, this is kind of what I'm going to get into as we go along. So, there's like this complex society living, it seems, globally. We see it in America, we see it in South America, we see it in Egypt, we see it in India. All these complex, we even see these masks that date back to 10,000 BC that are abstract and very old, that were found in Siberia. And it has etchings and abstract art etched in them. And so there's this complex society existing around 10,000 BC. And then all of a sudden you just see it disappear. It's as though everything just went away, and sea levels rose around that exact time, right at the end of the last ice age. Deglaciation, the melting of the caps of the excess glaciers on North and South Pole, and sea levels rose drastically, and that's where we see that structure in Japan getting submerged under the water. Same thing with city in India. And so it's fascinating. It's and it ties in with that flood story found within Genesis. Not just the flood story, but even what's represented in Genesis chapter 6 with the sons of God mating with women. And it's almost as though you have this highly intelligent beings that existed and was alongside human beings and helped build these complex societies with them, because humans were still quite primitive at that time. And they shouldn't be, and archaeologists, agree, we should have not been able to build such monumental structures at that time. So And of course, what other evidence do we have for that? So here's the impression of what may be the ark over at around the base of the Mount Ararat. Um, let's see, I have another picture here. Oh, I gotta zoom out. And here's another picture over here. You can see this was calculated supposedly to be the same length and width as what the Bible depicts the ark to be at. So that's very fascinating in and of itself. And that's at the mountains of Ararat. But what's more interesting is this place that was built. It seems it was somewhat constructed around the same time as the other structure, just slightly after. The approximate dating around 9,000 BC, so about 600 years after the proposed destructive date, according to Homer, of the city or continent of Atlantis, as well as the structure of Japan. And so it's like this complex society was wiped out, eliminated. But some of it still lingered on. And it's at this intriguing site. I don't know, where's the other picture? Yeah, well, we'll just use this one, I guess, for right now. So big, there we go. Göbekli Tepe, which is in southern Turkey, not too far from the Zagros Mountains, and about 300 miles southeast of the mountains of Ararat. And what fascinates me about this place the most, well, it's dating for one thing, dating back to 9,000 BC, and I believe that's sometime around the time of Noah and the flood. Remember, these dates are approximations, but it seems as though it's an altar of some sort, and they have animal bones, animal fragments all over the place, various different animals, birds, mammals, all sorts of different species, not including the fact various different species. As you can see here, you got flamingos or falcons. There's flamingos in here. There's scorpions. There's all sorts of different various. They have wild boar etched into the stone pillars. Each stone pillar weighs several tons. I believe it's 10 tons per stone pillar. And yeah, no, exactly, Alan. I was going to get it. It was intentionally buried about 8,000 BC. 8,800 BC, I believe, is what it was. I'm trying to look here real quick on. So yeah, so they found various animal fragments. They have the etchings of the animals. Some of them not even they're indigenous of the region. They're not even native to that particular region. So they'd say it's almost like an ark of some sort. In essence, because it has all these various different animals on there, kind of representing what the story of Noah's Ark represented. But in chapter 10, I believe it is, if I'm not mistaken, Genesis chapter 10, it talks about how Noah, they descended on to the mountains of Ararat, and then they descended from the mountains of Ararat. It doesn't specify where they descended or how far they went, but he built an altar to the Lord and sacrificed one of every animal. It would take a magnificent structure to be able to sacrifice that many animals. And you're talking various different animals, an altar erected, and this kind of fits that picture. Now, I mean, I'm not sure if 300 miles, of course, back then it was a little different, and we're not sure exactly how far he would actually travel, but it seems plausible that this could have been the altar that Noah started. And what's fascinating about it is it started, as one circular pillar. Let me get this on here so you can get a better idea of what this place actually complex looked like. and it's huge. And so these are some of the circles. It's circle upon circle upon circle. And so far they uncovered about 5% of it. And there's, I mean, several dozen circles built onto each other. It's almost as though they build, they cover, they build, they cover. In the height, well, Göbekli Tepe actually means belly heel. So these pillars are actually stacked on top of built on top of each other. And whenever they left this site, they, as Alan put in there, intentionally buried this site. And it reaches from its base upward to about 50 feet up in the air, as how many pillars are stacked on top of each other, covering, I believe, I can't remember exactly how large, how many acres this site actually covers, but we're talking dozens upon dozens of circular pillars, containing 10-ton pillars in them, circling around. And so the very intriguing side, it says, though the descendants of Noah continued to keep building upon his accomplishments of his altar and carried on that tradition. Let me get this up. And not including the fact that, because they were talking about how complex this site really is. Here's a pillar right here, has the falcons, I believe a flamingo over here. But they even believe that this up here actually represents the earliest form of possible writing, hieroglyphs of some sort. They're not sure exactly, but it mimics actually one of the hieroglyphs that are found over in Egypt. It actually shows a similar hieroglyph. I should have grabbed that off the deal, but even this is represented in Egyptian mythology as well, with the falcon and holding the sun. And you're talking thousands and thousands of years prior to the emergence of Egyptian society. You're talking complex Egyptian society emerged right around 3,500 BC, or really about 3,000 BC. And this is around 9,000 BC. That gives you any idea. So we're talking 6,000 years prior to that, about 5 or so thousand years before Stonehenge. Stonehenge looks primitive compared to this structure here. So it's almost as though they were carrying some type of advanced knowledge, I guess technology, so to speak, from the remnants of chapter 6, from the Nephilim, from the sons of God, which would make sense because of Noah being from that era, carrying over that knowledge. And then it seems as though, as some archaeologists have proposed, that knowledge had been lost and it just kind of dissipated over time. And it's as though everyone kind of became scattered and that knowledge went away. And and what's fascinating is you see these, not the same pillars. You never see the T-shaped pillars again. The only place you see that is a place called Kore Navale. Navale Kore, which is, I believe it's 10 kilometers away from Göbekli Tepe. And it's actually just after Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. It was abandoned. And it's a smaller site. Let me get it on here. But it's also a very fascinating site as well, but it depicts the similar thing. Of course, it's going to small photo. Zoom this in. It looks very much, but the pillars are actually smaller than the ones that go back to Tempe. That's one photo. But the complex, this is what's found over, which is a little fascinating in and of themselves. You see the arms, and I'll get into that here in a second on the pillars. Well, we're already 50 minutes, okay. But you see the elongated heads. I mean, these are actually depictions of people or some type of entities. But the elongated heads, of course, makes me think of, gray aliens or something of that sort. But beyond that, so this is the action. You see the pillars, and you have this monolith here erected. You see smaller stone pillar, just like over at Göbekli Tepe, but much smaller in size. So it's as though they lost this sort of ancient knowledge, and everything gets smaller, kind of like an Inca. With the Incans, You see smaller stones on top of the larger ones. It says, oh, they lost that knowledge of some sort, correlating with the biblical story found in Genesis 6. It was this advanced civilization that was existing at that time with powerful, highly intelligent entities and half human hybrids, so to speak. Let's see what's okay. Yeah, there's cattle on these pillars that go back to the tempe. But it was deliberately buried, and around. Let me see if I have it on here. If I put it on there, so there's a place called Tel Curamel, I believe is how you pronounce that. It's about 12,000 years old, but that was the initial process. It didn't actually reach its peak until approximately 8,700 years, 8,800 years ago. It reached its peak of accomplishment. And it's this mound. And this is where it fascinates. And it's actually a tower. And this is where we get to the Tower of Babel. And it's not very far from Göbekli Tepe. That's why I proposed that Göbekli Tepe was actually the altar of Noah. Oh, wow, that's really small. Let me zoom that in. Kind of blurry just slightly. But so this is the mound, or the tower, rather. It's the most ancient tower in human history. It predates Jericho's tower, which was built after this one, shortly after that. And as I said before, its beginning phases started about 12,000 years ago, but it reached its peak about 8,800, 8,000, about 9,000 years ago, putting in approximately about 7,000, somewhere around 7,000, 8,000 BC, if I'm not mistaken. It reaches 444 meters up into the air. So let me backtrack this. I know I have a couple more pictures here. Here's a picture of the complex as well. The tower is actually behind it. They had dwelling areas, a very complex place. And then it was abandoned about 8,000 years ago out of nowhere. And after, there's a gap from 8,000 years ago to pretty much about 4,000 BC. So about 4,000 gap where nothing worldwide was really being done. Small little structures were being built, nothing. It's as though everyone kind of became scattered. As I said before, that knowledge had been lost. About 4,000 BC, we see the slow emergence of complex society in Samaria, as well as Egypt, but it really doesn't become advanced until about 3,000 BC. We see Stonehenge being built in 4,000 BC. You just see small structures, nothing in comparison to these massive structures. It's very fascinating. Let's see, I had the Urfa man on here. Now I don't see him on. Oh, there it is. This is actually found in Urfa, which is not too far from Göbekli Tepe and Navale Kore. This is called the Urfa man. And he dates back to about 9,000 years ago. You would think he might be some prehistoric or ancient priest of some sort, but the clothing that he is wearing is way too advanced for the clothing at that time. Much more advanced, as you see the hills coming down here. A very intriguing character, but this same representation is actually found at Göbekli Tepe in the pillars themselves. Let me see if I know I have a picture of it somewhere or another. I'll go back to Tepe. Pillars with the arms, but I cannot find it now. Let's see if this one shows very well. Well, this one shows enough. Okay, here we go. I showed it a while ago, but if you actually look here closely, I'm sure you see these are the arms, just like those little figurines. They have the arms coming down, and it comes down to this belt like structure. Yeah, it may have on that, but it's fascinating because it doesn't have a head. It has the stone top, but it's sort of elongated, that more towards the back than the front, which I find fascinating, and that correlates right with those little figurines. That you see the same exact outlay, the hands coming down, elongated heads, and then the same thing with the Urfa man. The arms coming down the side. Two is its belt. There's actually the belt, just like at Göbekli Tepe, that exists on this statue, and it's the earliest known life-size human statue in history, in human history. So very fascinating stuff as it all ties in. But it seems as though the tower that I showed you, the very first tower to ever be built by humankind, reaching up to 440 meters high, and then abandoned. And then there's, it's as though everyone became scattered, just like the biblical story. There wasn't much construction. You can look throughout history from about 8,000 BC down the line. There was very minimal, and everything that was constructed was a much smaller scale compared to Göbekli Tepe or the Sphinx or the structure found at Japan. So it all correlates with one thing with a much earlier date, but even with that, with the biblical stories of the Tower of Babel, everyone kind of being one in that same region, and then it gets dispersed, and it's a very fascinating time period, to say the least. It intrigues me quite a bit. So we saw, of course, we're at an hour at this point. We saw the proposed location of a very plausible location of the Garden of Eden. The first two humans that invented agriculture and domestication of animals, to say the least. We see that evidence eastward of that region where the proposed Garden of Eden site would have been, over in the Zagros Mountains. Then we see Göbekli Tepe, which is about 300 miles southeast of mountains of Ararat, where it says that Noah would have descended at. And we see the first tower. We see the complex society that existed prior to the time of mass worldwide flooding. The sea levels rising around 80 meters total, around 11,000 or so BC, 11,000 or so BC. And so then we see even the very earliest record of string instruments around 15,000 years ago, correlating with one of Cain's descendants, Jabal. And so that pretty much wraps it up. Now, as I wanted to kind of get into the notion, I've spoken about it before, I know, on Thought Provoking Hour, about that of Adam and Eve being the first Homo sapiens, conscious human beings, rather. And that helped bring about their choice, brought about the fall of man. But, how does that add up with there being humans prior to us? And we find that in chapter 1, where humans are actually created. And then we see chapter 2 presenting the story of the first conscious human being. But now we're already at an hour, so I figure I'll just wait till next week to talk about that. It gives me something extra to talk about. And then maybe I'll go into the idea of even the story of Exodus being much earlier than what is proposed. They proposed anywhere from 1500 to 1200 BC. And I believe it was sometime around 2200 BC. When Moses them exited out of Egypt, and there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that, as well as the character of Joseph and Abraham, all found archaeological evidence, all found at that time frame, stemming back to 2600 BC to 3000 BC for Abraham. So much 1,000 years earlier than what modern day Bible scholars believe. And the biblical story is very interesting, especially as you get into that early of history, it's very difficult to connect everything because we have limited knowledge. But as it continues to go on, all I see is more and more evidence for the biblical stories. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm actually trying to put together a book on all this stuff. I've been wanting to for a while. And I know last year I actually started really piecing things together, and then the COVID pandemic hit, and so I wasn't able. I didn't really follow through with all of it, and had a few different changes, to say the least, especially with my wife getting pregnant. And so, but I plan on getting this piece together and writing a full-fledged book, stemming from the time of the Garden of Eden all the way to the time of the Exodus, and the various evidence that correlates with those stories. That's all. I love that stuff. So I hope you enjoyed. I really appreciate you guys tuning in and for supporting. If you'd like to support my work and everything, you can by donating on PayPal through the link in the description, or you can become a Patreon or a patron on Patreon, and you can help support me on there. It's a monthly donation deal, and you can donate however you want, and it does it every month and helps support me with book writing and research and things. And you can also check out some of my current books on Amazon. So that's all in the description of this video. And again, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you all a bunch, and I hope you have a good rest of your Sunday. Good evening. Thank you all, and much love, and God bless.